Welcome to Normal Ireland's Live. I'm Curtis Daly, and I'm joined by the fantastic, the amazing Helena, aka No Justice MTG. How are we? It's budget day. You are quite literally the perfect person to have on tonight.
I mean, I always look forward to budget day. Most exciting day of the year for nerds like me. Although not particularly exciting budget in the substance, but certainly it was an exciting day for its announcement.
It was. There was drama and things that have never happened in history. But yeah, I think it wasn't the most exciting budget. But we're going to go through it regardless. Of course, later on, our viewers will also be hearing from Hannah Martin, the co-director of the Green New Deal Rising. You don't want to miss it. You can also help us grow by visiting turnleftmedia.co.uk/support to help fund our work, or by becoming a YouTube member. Now, tonight we will be focusing, of course, on the budget, and we're going to break it down into different sections. Now, to remind viewers, before we get into the ins and outs of the budget, these are the fiscal rules Rachel Reeves has imposed on her own government. Current budget balance. So the government must show the current budget is in surplus by the end of the Parliament, a change from the previous rule that focused on total borrowing. The last time we had a full-year budget surplus was 2001. Not monthly, but a yearly surplus. 2001. The debt rule. Public sector net financial liabilities must be falling as a share of national income by 2029 to 2030. So the aim is to have a smaller debt by the end of Parliament, but I believe that is only in terms of day-to-day spending. The rolling 3-year targets, the rules for borrowing and debt are now rolling targets, and that applies over a 3-year period rather than a fixed 5-year target. This gives the government more flexibility, apparently, to respond to economic fluctuations. Then, of course, the welfare cap. So, in essence, Reeves is putting the reduction of the national debt and deficit over everything else instead of spending money based on need, based on employment and people. The debt comes first. Now, she could technically fulfill the needs of people within her own fiscal framework, but that would require tax rises. Given how she won't increase income tax and has ruled out wealth taxes, the only thing left is to cut in some areas and spend elsewhere. So she has 3 options: tax rises, austerity, or abandoning the fiscal rules. Now, this budget, she has announced a sweeping set of tax rises to the tune of 26 billion. Now, journalists managed to get hold of the budget details early as the OBR accidentally released their full report, including all of the details of the budget 2 hours before. I'd tried clicking on the report. It was then swiftly deleted. But the media loves this sort of political drama, but I say abolish the OBR. Now, in Reeves' speech, we may have got the first ever boob joke in budget history. This is her attacking Green Party leader, Zach Polansky.
I know that the leader of the Green Party is a keen hypnotherapist, and he believes that he can achieve remarkable things using only the power of his mind. Unfortunately, the only things getting bigger under his approach would be the deficit and the rate of inflation.
I think she was so happy with herself after that. But despite Reeves attacking Zach Polansky, he's actually been getting some acknowledgement and, dare I say, positive media coverage.
What about Zach Polansky? Zach Polansky is doing all the hard yards at the moment on the left, I would say, in politics. He's on our programme this morning because he wants a 1% tax on wealth over £10 million and 2% over £1 billion. He said it would raise £14.5 billion a year.
He's running rings around Labour on the left. He really is. He's running rings. And when did the late Green Party last get so much publicity on the eve of a budget?
He's raising his own money because he's getting more and more members to the Green Party, earning more membership fees.
Are you backing his proposal?
No, I'm not backing his proposal at all.
It sounds like you were.
But I'm just saying, I'm absolutely sure, Ed. What I'm saying is he's got a gift for PR, and the Green Party is punching way above its weight.
The trouble is, Kevin,
and it's now overtaken the Liberal Democrats in the polls.
Isn't it?
I wouldn't argue against it. I'm in favour of a wealth tax.
Unless you're a billionaire, and there's so few billionaires, unless you're a billionaire, you're going to think, Yeah, why shouldn't billionaires pay more?
Well, I think, yeah, I think you, right, I
So,
think...
Kevin, you need to argue against this.
I'm not arguing against
Oh,
it.
are you a Green Party member?
No, but I'm
Defection. Defection alert.
Yes.
Defection alert.
I am in sympathy.
They probably don't want him.
With higher taxes on wealthier people and higher earners to make Britain a fairer place.
Yeah.
And I can see a wealth tax on assets, and it's UK patriotic millionaires who have been proposing this. And it's on assets over 10 million. So you keep your first 10 million and then you pay a small amount on the top of the 2%. And that 2%, well, if you've got 10 million, assets normally go up 5% a year. So you're still making money.
So you're making the case...
You might find an old lady somewhere living in a castle.
Yeah. You're making the case
exemption.
for a wealth tax that the Labour Chancellor is not. And Labour have to argue against the Green Party, who are making this very popular proposal.
You're quite right. And well, I'll let her argue against it. I'd argue for it. I'm with those who want higher taxes.
I think there were some
people.
Labour MPs outside Parliament with Zach Polansky yesterday, Labour MPs on the left of the party.
I mean, he referenced a lady in a castle. I don't know if he's talking about J.K. Rowling. Probably not. It's also really strange when, and this is what happens in the corporate media, you say something in terms of policy you agree with the Greens. Like, oh, you must be Green now. No. But the Greens actually weren't the only target. Reeves also didn't hold back against Nigel Farage.
And finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, we are ramping up sanctions on Russia, and we are freezing known Russian assets. But let me be clear, I don't actually mean the honourable member for Clacton.
I mean, look, it's funny to attack Nigel Farage, but Reeves doesn't have the source. I don't think she's got the source. And, like, something immediately becomes less funny when you sort of smile. You go, oh, I did a funny. It just doesn't hold up. Now, how has the market responded to the budget? Well, actually, it's been pretty good overall. So it's taken the markets a while to decide whether they like the budget or not, but the response now seems to be solidly positive. The pound went up and government borrowing costs went down when the OBR's document appeared online early by mistake. Both signs that the budget was that the budget was going down well. That went into reverse around 12 o'clock, but as traders digested their lunches and the full details of the Chancellor's speech, sentiment began to improve. By 3:15, the effective interest rate on the benchmark government bond was down 0.05 percentage points from the moment the OBR document first emerged, indicating increased faith in the state of the UK's public finances. The pound was up around 0.5% against the dollar. Now, let's start off with wages and taxes. I think for most people, that's where they find things most intriguing. Chancellor Rachel Reeves has announced an increase in the minimum wage. It is currently set at £12.21 an hour and is set to rise by 4.1% to £12.71 an hour from next April under the changes announced by the government. For those aged 18 to 20, the hourly rate is £10. This will rise by 8.5% to £10.85 an hour. And for those under 18, it's £7.55. That's really low. I mean, £7.55. And this is going to rise by 6% to £8 an hour. Now, there still hasn't been an equalisation of wages. Younger people are still penalised for doing the exact same work. Now, taxes, which is where I think, again, most of the intrigue from people is going to come from. The budget will include £26 billion worth of tax increases. They are a mansion tax for houses worth £2 million or more, estimated to bring in £400 million. This will come in from 2028. So that's £2,500 for properties worth than £2 million and £7,500 for properties worth more than £5 million annually. Pension contributions are no longer exempt from national insurance. If you voluntarily contribute more than £2,000 annually, that will now be taxed, raising £4.7 billion. Electric vehicles are being taxed 3p on the mile from 2028. At the same time, fuel duty will be frozen for another 5 months, but it will increase from 2026. Now, because it's being frozen, it's actually going to cost us 2.4 billion. Gambling taxes will bring in 1.1 billion. Remote gaming duty is being raised from 21% to 40%. That's quite a big tax increase. Duty on online betting is increasing from 15 to 25%. Low tax rates from retail, hospitality, and leisure properties. This will be paid for higher taxes or higher rates on properties over $500,000, including warehouses. This is kind of a mini redistribution from big business to small business. So on the surface, it sounds quite good. A tourist tax, and of course, no increased income tax. So not increasing income tax is what Labour said they won't do. However, they have frozen the tax threshold. What this will do is create something called fiscal drag. The Institute for Fiscal Studies think tank estimates that a 2-year extension to the current freeze in the thresholds would mean 960,000 more people paying income tax and 790,000 more people dragged into the higher rates as their wages increase. Should this be implemented alongside a freeze on national insurance thresholds, it could generate an estimated 8.3 billion annually for the exchequer by 2029-2030. Now, these are the current tax bans, which I don't think is at the moment that progressive. I mean, I would like to see more bans, and ultimately the personal allowance should be reduced. Although, a big caveat here, I think that should be in the future, not during a cost of living crisis. The top rate needs to be higher, at the very least, restore it to 50%. But what's missing from this budget? A wealth tax and no equalisation between capital gains and income taxes. What was interesting from the OBR report was this graph. For all of the talk about the rich paying so much in taxes, we tax those who generate an income from work more than the giant corporate profits. So what we should be doing is taxing corporate revenue, not just profits. And a really good analogy I heard is, if we're going to tax profits, then we should only tax people's income after bills and rent have been paid for. That's a good little line. Now, why all of these tax rises to the tune of 26 billion? Well, taking away the 12 billion pounds of spending, this means her fiscal headroom has doubled to 22 billion. So instead of spending 26 billion or more, she's opted to save this money. Why? To please her neoliberal friends. This is bad for the economy as it's taking money out of it. Increasing taxes to spend, I think, is good. It is good. But increasing taxes just to say, whoa, I'm really responsible, and now I have 22 billion just to sit there, it's neoliberal crap. Helena, to start off, what is your overall view of the budget?
I mean, my first reaction to it was a bit of a nothing burger. I was expecting bigger things to be happening in this budget. I was expecting a really kind of big change, given that their political future seems very uncertain. Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves, they can't really tell a story about the future of the country. No such story has come to the forth in the wake of the actual budget announcements today. There's some tax rises. As you say, most of that is to create more fiscal headroom because of the fiscal rules. That essentially means that the OBR decide how much the government can or can't spend, because it's their projections. Again, because this is about fixing the taxation so that in 3 years' time we meet the targets based upon what the OBR predict the economy is going to look like at that point. So it's all based in terms of guesswork. So which I really don't like this, when we can just be doing things responding to the economic reality rather than on predictions. But in the grand scale of things, there are some tax rises. There's some extra spending in terms of the removal of the 2-child cap on universal credit. And that's basically it. It's a real nothing burger. And what's interesting is that loads of people are reacting to this, going, oh, it's a huge increase in taxation. She's the biggest raising tax chancellor of all time. And I'm like, well, she hasn't raised taxes less than other people. That's true. But in the grand scheme of things, what we have had is 46 years where people have just been kind of ignoring a big elephant in the room, which we haven't taxed enough. Like, our tax take as a percentage of GDP is significantly lower than other Western and Northern European countries who have similar demands on the public realm, who have similar levels of an aging population that we do. And whilst Tony Blair didn't grapple with this and did PFIs rather than tax increases or public borrowing, and the Tories did austerity, both of those are problems which actually are in the root of the fact that we've kind of been allergic to higher taxation in this country for a bit too long. So in terms of the actual extra that we spend as a percentage of GDP, what we've moved from like 37% before the election to about 39% now, like it's not a huge change in the grand scheme of things. We're still lower broadly than the kind of median tax take as a percentage of GDP when you look at other like EU countries, for example. So in the long and short of it, it's not a big change. And when it comes to the values of it, I'm glad to see the two-child benefit cap go. That shows that there is at least some pressure from outside the party coming from their stratospheric kind of drop in support and the increase in support of the Green Party, which shows a move from Labour to Green. So they're trying to win back some of those people and back their own Labour Party MPs, given that there is precious little confidence in Keir Starmer coming from the backbenches. But doing that by increasing taxes on working people rather than having a wealth tax, because she had kind of admitted in her first budget that kept the fiscal drag in place, and then extending that now, she kind of admitted that was kind of breaking the spirit of her manifesto, even if it didn't break like the letter of the manifesto. I don't think that that is the best way during a cost of living crisis of formulating a tax policy. I would, we can have a broader discussion about a more contributory system of taxation. I think they would be warranted, but maybe after the cost of living crisis is finished and you've shown that you can fairly tax wealth, you can tax corporations, you can tax the ultra wealthy more than just, a £500 million tax on mansions. Once you've shown that you can do that, we've got the public finances in a better place, maybe we can look at a more social democratic economy where people feel like that taxation is something they're happy to do for a better public realm. But until we've seen that they're happy to go after the big giants who aren't paying enough tax, I don't think we can really look at the regular people just yet.
Yeah, I definitely want to have a conversation about taxes more generally, because no one's made the argument. We can talk about that in a second, but to touch upon fiscal drag, because that's, 8.3 billion. It's not the largest portion, but it's the largest single portion. So you've got 8.3 billion pounds worth of taxes through fiscal drag, and then you've got lots of little bits that bring it to 26 billion. Let me play devil's advocate though for a second. I do enjoy this. Is that such a bad thing, right? Yes, if you earn more, you are pushed into a higher bracket, therefore you're paying more tax, but you're earning more. That's how taxes work. But would you consider, look, if we were to move the threshold to match wage rises, if it beats inflation or your wage rises beats inflation, then wouldn't restructuring the threshold kind of be a tax cut, if you think about it? I absolutely think it's problematic because stealth taxes might be a bit harsh, but you are not being really honest with the people. But if the left, maybe more broadly, wants to talk about a more social democratic society, a more participatory society, then bringing in £8.3 billion worth of, again, fiscal drag, is that the worst thing in the world?
I don't think it is the worst thing in the world. I said that I think further down the line, it's perfectly reasonable to say, well, look, if you look at the social democratic economies, right, not only do lower earners pay more income tax there than they do here, what that has done is have public buy-in from the whole population into this idea that we all contribute and we all get something back, and they can have the manufactured consent somewhat for a high tax economy. In this economy where actually higher earners pay more than they do in Denmark or Sweden or Norway, but lower earners pay significantly less because of the tax-free threshold that we have that they don't have, or at the very least is significantly higher, like triple in some cases when you look at Denmark, where it's like 5,000 euros essentially in equivalency in kroner that is their tax-free threshold, and also high municipal taxes too, that they are happy to pay it. Whereas you ask people in this country, would you be happy to pay more taxes? And they go, well, with tax, I don't want to pay more taxes, And I'm like, well, you do actually not pay that much tax in the grand scheme of things compared to other countries. But again, I think that to be able to do that, you need to show that you can also go after the people with the broader shoulders. You need to first go, it's a cost of living crisis. We're not going to touch that yet. We're going to go after the corporations. We're going to go after the absolute ultra wealthy in this country. And until you can show that you can do that, I don't think you can get public support for other forms of tax increases on regular working people. It's also worth pointing out as well that people who get hit hardest by fiscal drag are higher earners, the people who are already paying more in percentage terms of their own income here than they do in social democratic economies, right? In the Denmarks and Norways of this world. Those people already pay more tax here than they do, and they're going to pay even more
Mm.
because of fiscal drag, right? Because the higher medium earners are going to get put into the higher tax, the extra top tax rate, rather than just the regular higher tax rate, if you see what I mean. And I think when we talk about brain drain, a lot of people talk about the super rich leaving, and I think that's very unlikely. They have huge amounts of wealth. They're already making returns on those investments that are greater than the wealth tax. I don't think they would move. I actually think you have more to fear from an exodus of higher tax paying
Yeah.
working people,
Mm.
because the working from home is far more likely now. Working remotely is a real kind of new thing that's happening. They can just remote work from the United Arab Emirates if they really want to, and it wouldn't really uproot so much of their actual working life. And they would get a significant amount extra in terms of their overall income if they did that. Whereas you don't actually get a significant more if you avoid a wealth tax as a billionaire. That kind of brain drain, I think, is worth considering in a way that I don't think it's true for the super rich. I don't think we're getting to that point just yet. I don't think we're necessarily going to be seeing a huge exodus of high earners from this country anytime soon, but it's certainly something to keep on your radar as the world of work changes, as the incentives change within the economy. So it's a difficult situation to be in terms of how do we ensure that high earners pay enough so that we can get buy-in for wanting to give them public services, and that we don't brain drain them away. Because you've got to remember, right, in that we means test to fucking high heavens in this country. There's the 100k tax trap people talk about, where you lose all the access to child welfare. So you just say, or the childcare policy. So you just go, I'm just going to earn £99,999 a year and not hit that tax trap, and suddenly have a marginal tax rate of 10,000% or some shit. So if you want to have this higher taxes on higher earners, and I think that we should, then you should not means test these things, because it creates a perverse incentive and some weird marginal tax rates in certain parts of the tax curve, which I think we should do away with. Means testing is bad, I think, anyway, but it
Mm.
also creates tax distortions and perverse incentives in terms of getting people to earn more. Because if they want to earn more than 99,999, we should want them to do so, because they should be paying more tax, and they would pay more tax. But the means test on those welfare payments, or those means tests on those public benefits, those public services they would get, means that they are incentivized not to do so, which reduces the tax take and reduces the speculation on higher earnings, which is also bad.
I agree with everything you said there, by the way. And yeah, I think it's true. From a socialist universalist perspective, I want to see childcare across the board. I don't care how rich you are. But there's an economic argument for it as well. Like you said, like if you're earning 100 grand a year and £1, you've removed so many benefits, which isn't good. I think there's
And also, like,
many.
if they're paying a higher rate of tax than everybody else, they come
Yeah.
up with they pay 30% of all the taxes, or whatever it is, in terms of income tax, and they don't get anything back from the state for that. They're going to resent paying that tax even
Absolutely.
more.
Yeah.
Like, if they feel like they're getting back something from the state for doing so, in terms of high quality public services, they're not going to go private, because NHS is the envy of the world, like it was in 2010. Then they'd be perfectly happy to have buy-in for paying the high marginal rate of tax that they currently pay. But if they don't get that, the country goes to the shit, because they're the only ones paying tax. They will leave for the United Arab Emirates, you know?
Yeah. And that's a
Eventually.
very interesting point, because when it comes to the billionaires and the super rich, they're less immovable because they've got ties, they've got companies, they've got assets. Whereas someone who's on like 80 grand to 100 grand a year, if they're just getting money from their income, they don't have any businesses or whatever, or capital gains from assets, they can just move. I mean, it's not exactly the same, but when it comes to like Australia, the way they pay their doctors and nurses, and the way they literally poach our own doctors and nurses, pay insane amounts. They pay high wages, they pay for your plane to get here, they pay for your rent for a year. And I mean, who blames people leaving this country? So I think you're absolutely right. In a way, the higher earners on income is a far more danger of capital flight than it is for the very richest in society, which is why I'm so glad that when it comes to the left, taxes are mostly focused on wealth rather than income. I want to ask you about electric vehicles. So they're now adding a tax on EV. One argument is that, you know, EVs, they still use roads. They're heavy. They are quite heavy, and therefore should contribute to the upkeep, right? And Gareth Dennis, friend of the show, fantastic work on public transport. He actually supports this tax, right? The other side of the argument is that we should be encouraging the use of EV vehicles. But again, they're not perfect, right? I'd rather public transport being the main sort of way of getting around the country, and, you know, to your job or whatever. But adding a tax is disincentivizing it. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think the real issue here is that if we're going to have a freeze of fuel duty for another 5 months, then that's also creates a perverse incentive. I think Gareth Dennis's argument, I think that's really key in that because of the level to which that they require more maintenance for the roads they use, applying that tax seems fair. And the other thing I think you're correct in saying is that they aren't a solution. Electric vehicles aren't a solution. Public transport is. There's a great Adam Something video, which is the electric vehicles kind of a con. Would I rather more people replace their petrol cars that will start using electric cars more broadly, or ditch their car to get a diesel bus? You'd see a significant emissions reduction from the latter than the former, despite the fact that it's not an electric bus. It is so much more efficient per person, and also there's the carbon footprint of creating the electric vehicle in the first place. How many, you know, Congolese people have to be able to die for the precious metals that go into creating the electric battery in the first place? That there's so many different things that make electric vehicles kind of this patchwork solution for a terminally car-brained country like the United Kingdom, and certainly the United States, where if they are going to have an upkeep, we will need to tax them more. And especially since we have an electric vehicle mandate now, whilst we're moving from the position where we need to really get people to incentivize to do it towards the position where, you know, ICE vehicles aren't really going to get produced in this country or imported to this country for after a certain period, we're going to want to tax them properly like we would any vehicle, especially when we want to incentivize public transport usage, which it looks like it seems the government is now wanting to do by freezing train prices. Although you'd think if you wanted to incentivize public transport use, you wouldn't have increased the bus fare cap from £2 to £3. The most regressive thing that I think they've done so far since coming to office. If I wanted to pick one policy that Labour have done since coming to office that I think is the worst, it is the increase of the bus fare cap, because it's just makes no sense at all. If you really want to be incentivizing public transport, in my
100%, 100%. Rail and public transport buses, they are the future. I want to see trams. You know, I lived in Nottingham. I mean, you're from Nottingham. They've got trams there. Moving to Leeds is quite a shock because they've got a really bad public transport system going on. It's still reliant on buses, but it's not publicly owned. It's owned by First Group. Now, it's annoying because I'm from Bristol, and the biggest contract of buses is First Group. They're shoddy. Moved to Nottingham, pretty decent public services there, or public transport. And then back to Leeds, it's back to First Group. They suck. Also, I recommend anyone watching, please look into Gareth Dennis. He's on YouTube, so just type in Gareth Dennis. I think it's Rail Natter. He is fantastic. Absolutely amazing. But let's move on to our next section of the budget. And we're going to talk about welfare policies. The Chancellor has announced prescription charges are to remain at £9.90 and an increase in welfare. This will affect benefits such as universal credit and pensions. Some benefits, including all the main disability benefits, such as personal independent payment, attendance allowance and disability living allowance, as well as carers allowance, will rise by 3.8% in April, in line with rising prices. There will be a string of changes to universal credits in April, external, following announcements made earlier by this government. The state pension in April will rise by 4.8%, in line with average wages, which means the new flat rate state pension for those who receive state pension age after April 2016 will increase to £241.30 a week, or £12,547.60 a year, a rise of £574.60. The old basic rate pension for those who reach state pension age before April 2016 will go up to £184.90 a week, or £9,614.80 a year, a rise of £439.40. In general, you need 35 years of qualifying contributions to get a full state pension. This brings the state pension closer to being subject to income tax, a source of some debate. It will also reignite discussions over the fairness of the so-called triple lock. By the way, the upkeep of universal credit and disability allowance is pitfall. It should be way higher. Now, changes to Motability is a controversial one. Disabled people who have a car through the Motability scheme will no longer be allowed premium vehicles such as BMWs, Mercedes, Audi, Alfa Romeo, and Lexus. This was celebrated by Tory MP Helen Whately. Scrapping luxury Motability cars is a start, but time for Labour to seriously reform the scheme. Conservatives would end free cars for tennis elbow, acne, and ADHD. Motability was set up for the seriously disabled. It must get back to doing that. Well, there's a slight problem with what Helen is saying. It's not true. So Motability cars are given to people who are on PIP and score 12 points on the measures. You can see it on screen. Acne, tennis elbow, and ADHD does not give you a score of 12. But I also thought this was a very good tweet by Dr. J. Watts. Motability versus company cars. Motability, 2.8 billion from benefits. New car for disabled. Demonized as scroungers. Company cars, 3 billion in tax breaks for execs in EVs. Abuse ignored. Both public money, both can be gained. Why target the wheelchair user but not the CEO? It is also being confirmed that the 2-child benefit cap has also been scrapped. The move will increase the benefits for 560. Sorry, I'll start that again. The move will increase the benefits for 560,000 families by an average of £5,310, the Office for Budget Responsibilities Fiscal Outlook has calculated. Set to come into effect from April 2026, the government estimates that the change will reduce the number of children living in poverty by 450,000 by 2029 to 2030. It will cost the Exchequer £3 billion by this time, according to the OBR. This will be partly offset by reforms to gambling taxation, set to raise £1.1 billion. I think it's insane to be like, wow, we're lifting 450,000 children out of poverty. Well, I mean, you kept them in poverty by keeping the scrap, and then you got rid of the scrap, and now you're celebrating it. And then you removed the whip from the Abraham Peas in doing so. Thank you for your stupid little Quango, the Child Action Poverty Force, or whatever the fuck's it called, right? Spending millions of pounds on a Quango to say, oh, well, we should just scrap the cap. Even though multiple organisations, poverty organisations, said to do this. Another Labour U-turn. Helena, the scrapping of so-called luxury cars, I mean, this is just performative by doing this. I mean, how has this improved anyone else's life?
Well, it's pure politics of envy. That's all it is. It is, oh, well, I'm seeing disabled people have nice things, and that makes me feel upset. Wow. That's the only response that you have. So all the money that the government will save from this, because people somehow think that people are getting free BMWs. I promise you, no one is getting a free BMW on Motability. They get a set payment by qualifying for the higher rate mobility payment element of personal independence payment. That goes towards some amount of the lease of the car. And if the lease of that car is more expensive than the money you would get from the mobility element of PIP that you would get in cash, were you to not claim Motability, by the way, right? They would still be getting that money even if you scrap Motability tomorrow, right? Anything above that amount, you have to pay extra for. If you want to get a car that's more expensive than the amount that you qualify for from that mobility element, you have to pay the difference. Right? No one's getting these free cars because they are paying for anything they wouldn't get covered with welfare. The only what bit you'll save is the fact that the car is VAT free and has servicing included. Of course, that means you'd still get free servicing if you take away the expensive cars. There'd just be a small difference in price of what that service or insurance would cost, which isn't a huge difference. It's mostly the VAT saving that's different. And even then, it's not hardly a huge amount that you're saving anyway. Less than 5% of Motability cars are part of these premium brands. And so I think you're saving something like 64 million this way, which is peanuts, absolutely minuscule, 0.00005% of the government's budget. It's tiny, it's infinitesimal. And all because they're getting mad about the idea that disabled people are getting something that they don't deserve. Part of the reason why we're in this situation is because of just a fundamental misunderstanding of what PIP is. People think benefit and they think poor people. That's not what PIP is. PIP is a remuneration for those who have extra costs for being disabled. It doesn't matter whether you're poor, it doesn't matter whether you're rich, it doesn't matter whether you're middle income, those additional costs that you have for being disabled still exist. It is an equity between those who are not disabled and those who are disabled to bring the latter up to the former. It's not to try and make poor people less poor, it is to mitigate the extra costs of being disabled. And so, if you can afford to pay extra to upgrade that car, that is still fulfilling that function of ensuring that the extra mobility payment that you get goes towards the additional vehicle that you would need that some people might not need because you are disabled. That's what Motability is there for. It is not there because disabled people are so poor, because PIP doesn't have a work requirement. The amount of people I saw going, oh, how are they affording these upgrades if they're disabled? Because they have a fucking job. Because PIP isn't something that's there for people without jobs, despite every single Tory motherfucker trying to claim that it is. That's one of the biggest lies of all of this from people like Helen Whately, is the implication that this is an out-of-work benefit when it is not. If they wanted to have like a VAT reduction in terms of the discount that you get on VAT for these luxury brands or whatever, that if you want to pay the extra, you have to pay the extra VAT. You know what? Go ahead. Maybe I could acquiesce to that. But that's not what they care about. They care about disabled people being seen to have something that they want themselves. It's the envy that's the issue here. No one is saying, okay, maybe we should get rid of the VAT cut for the difference between the cheaper cars and the more expensive cars. They're not saying that. They're saying no Motability BMWs whatsoever. No one disabled should have access to these things at all, which is nonsensical. Because if they got an adaptation for it, and they got their mobility payment and didn't claim Motability, they could still claim the VAT discount if they bought a modified BMW privately using that Motability money. Or using that mobility payment, sorry, even if it wasn't through Motability. It's ridiculous. Like, these things as a product that you buy for disability are VAT exempt, regardless of whether it's done through Motability or not. And again, it's just people getting mad at something, A, that they don't understand, and B, that disabled people are perceived to be getting things that they don't feel they deserve, because they want to look at disabled people as some kind of burden upon the state. They want to look at disabled people as someone they should be pitying rather than envying, and that makes them feel bad. It's the feel bads they care about, not any mention of fairness, or equity, or any kind of utility of the policy.
I love how you frame this as the politics of envy. It quite literally is that, though. I mean, this is the epitome. I say this all the time. It's the epitome of Britishness. It's the crab mentality. There's a reason why you don't need to put a lid on a bucket when there's crabs in it, because anytime a crab gets near the top, other crabs pull them down. They go, well, if he's getting out and I'm not getting out, you can't have it. Because that's the thing when it comes to removing these luxury cars. It's not like your life is going to get better. It's just cruelty. It's just saying, well, I don't want a perceived thing that they're getting. I don't want them to have it. So get rid of it. I mean, anyone, any politician, any people in the media who are going after Motability, who are going after PIP, you're all a set of bastards, right? In a civilized fucking society, disability payments, PIP, anything that concerns disabled people should not be touched. It should not be fucking touched. Absolutely insane. Let's talk about pensions. Look, I oppose the scrapping of the winter fuel allowance. I think it was a bad idea, but also, again, socialist universalism. But we do seem to live in a gentocracy. Pensioners are now facing an extra boost, while young people continually are offered very little. I've just actually, I mean, there's so much little details that's come out of the budget. Just before we start the show, I learned about ISAs. And there's going to be a cap on ISAs, or I'm not quite sure.
They're reducing the cap on ISAs from 20k to 12k.
But that is only for 65 and under. So people over 65 don't get that. What do you make of the state pension rise?
We should scrap the triple lock. It should go. It should be replaced by a peg specifically to wages. I know that this one was pegged to wages because it was higher than inflation during the period this was calculated, but the triple lock should go. It should go. End the gentocracy today, please. I would very much like Boomertopia to be no longer the country that I live in. I mean, that's the thing, is that if you peg it to wages, then it means that there is political buy-in from the retired to want to see wages rise. At the moment, they don't have to care because they've got protected either way regardless. And so what the actual incentive you have in terms of the politics that the retired vote for is increasing asset values because they're more likely to own assets, right? If you incentivize them to want to see wages rise, that's better for everybody. But in terms of the actual things that are happening in this budget, insofar as you look at all of the previous state pension rises that have been pegged to inflation, i.e., there's been no cost of living crisis for people on the state pension because their income has gone up with the cost of living. So that's different from those of us who are earning money who've seen our wages be lower than the increase in the costs, right? Our increase in wages has caused a cost of living crisis because it's not been as high as what the increase in prices is, you know? That's a real differential between these two things. And so when you see increased taxes on pension contributions or reduced access to savings through an ISAs, specifically for working people, to go to continually increasing the remuneration from the state pension for the retired, it seems crazy to me. People are talking in this budget about, oh, they're spending so much money on the two-child welfare cap being removed, on universal credit. Oh, we're seeing the welfare bill spiral out of control. I'm like, the biggest part of the welfare bill that's spiraling out of control is the state pension. That is the thing that is going to be increasingly unaffordable if you stick to these kind of fiscal rules for the next however many years, because it is going to continually increase significantly more than wages, significantly more than other areas of public spending, and significantly more than the rest of the welfare state. That is one of the things that is growing the fastest in terms of government spending in this country. And I want it to continue to rise. I think it should rise with wages because I think that's the best political outcome. I'm not asking for it to be cut. I'm just asking for the rise to be less steep and to not essentially come out of current taxpayers, because that's what it comes at least somewhat relevant to, right? You'll need to get a certain amount of taxation to remove money from circulation to stop inflation. And why that is coming out of workers' wages to be able to curtail the extra government spending that might be inflationary, none of that is being curtailed in terms of welfare spending on the state pension. And that's a real problem. We're getting a transfer of wealth and a transfer of income from working people who are seeing not only their pension contributions taxed and not only seeing their income taxes essentially be increased by stealth through fiscal drag. That's not happening the other way around. It is a transferal of income from working age people to pensioners because people just don't realise. People don't realise that you don't pay into the state pension. You've people who say, well, I've paid in my whole life with national insurance. That's not how that works. Your national insurance payments went into the state coffers when it was paying out the state pension of the people of the generation above you. That's how these things have always worked. You don't have a contribution that you pay into a pot that you then claim from the state in retirement. That's never been how that it's worked. And so to create a society where there is a more better social contract, I think the triple lock will have to go and replace specifically with a peg to wages, so that there is always an interest for both sides for the same thing rising at the same time, rather than it being disparate from each other. And that's a better social contract, in my opinion. And last point on the winter fuel allowance. The means test was changed from a cliff edge, at a very low cliff edge. They increased that, and instead of taking it away from people, they gave it to everybody and then taxed it back from higher pension recipients. That's a good system. It's a system that I recommended right at the start, because no one misses out. There's no cliff edge, and you are applying it via a tax to people who already have plenty of means. That's a better means test than having a cliff edge where you take it away and some people don't apply for it. Some people have different living arrangements, like having a tax that just recoups that is the best way of ensuring that no one misses out. That's a better situation, I think. So you ensure you have better welfare payments for poorer pensioners, but rich pensioners get it taxed back off them. I think that's fair.
I always find it very fascinating when it comes to social attitudes for older people and pensioners. Really, really against other people having things, yet they're very happy for the workers to pay for that upkeep because it's a redistribution from the young to the old. Whilst at the same time, their social attitudes are complete reversal of it.
I mean, it is good. It's good that we have a state pension, right? It's very, very good that we have a state pension. And it's good that we at least have a government that wants to increase it rather than continually kind of go for pension cuts or anything. And that's not what I'm advocating for. But when you see the same generation of Tory boomers, right, which is the plurality, of the boomer generation vote for Tories or Reform. You look at current polling, very few of them vote for parties of the left or the Labour Party. It's not really a party of the left, are they? But they're mostly Tories or Reform voters. And they'll say things like, we should keep the triple lock, but we also want no welfare payments for children to be able to incentivize family formation. Not that it necessarily does that. The evidence is pretty slim. But even then, the argument you get from many people is saying, especially from Reform, is if we want people to have families, they need to be able to afford to do that. So we're going to get rid of the 2-child welfare cap for families, right? And they also want no immigration. They also want immigration to be net zero, essentially, by voting for Reform or the Tories. I'm like, how do you think this society is going to have the productive capacity to support a triple lock state pension with where the birth rate is decreasing and we are telling immigrants not to come here when they come here and increase our productive capacity by working? Like, how do you square this circle? This generation of Tories, specifically the Tory voters there, not everybody but the Tory and Reform voters, seem to want to have their cake, eat it, and have sprinkles and have everyone else's cake too. And that's not how that works, right? Very happy for there to be a state pension, very happy for it to see it rise over time, with wages especially, because that's a good system. But the idea that you can have that and not see the productive increases that we need from having more people working because we're having a higher birth rate, or more people working because we have migrants in an increasingly aging society, is madness. And they call us fiscally irresponsible on the left for wanting to tax billionaires. And yet their fiscal irresponsibility is this giant ballooning welfare bill for pensioners, whilst not wanting to at least have some kind of policy to increase the size of the workforce to be able to support it. Because it will have to happen. I want to see pensions increase, but if you want to see them increase, you'll need to have people making the things in the economy, and that will require higher birth rates or more immigration.
This poll I saw really aggravates me. It's just one poll, but it was about public transport and how obviously pensioners get free public transport. And, you know, you always do the breakdown of the age cohort, who supports what. Everyone supports free public transport for people I think is 25 and younger, right? The only age cohort that don't support it is 65 and over, and they're the only ones that get free transport. If you ask young people, do you think we should protect free transport for pensioners? They say, yes, we should. And then when you ask the people who get the free stuff, they say, do you want to maybe have someone else have it too? No. Really angers me. But this is the thing, we live in a gentocracy, so any of these sort of attacks on boomers is political suicide. Not to mention when it comes to the appreciation of house prices sitting on a gold mine. I think someone in the chat said that 80% of pensioners own their own home outright. Look, we got to move on because we have one more point before we move on.
Very, 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 very quick one. If you remember, I was talking about the voting intention of that demographic. None of them are voting Green. Like 3% or whatever of the demographic.
But they
vote Green.
They vote in droves.
It's true, but the perfect opportunity for the Green Party to go, working people, especially in the young people in precarious private sector gig economy jobs, right? Like, Reeves is putting your taxes up to pay for the triple lock. We're going to get rid of that, and we're going to prioritize young working people. I don't necessarily think that that's where they'll go, but and I don't necessarily think it's a good strategy, right? Or a good policy platform, sorry. But as an electoral strategy to get even more young people bought into your politics, might be successful for the Green Party in campaigning, going after Labour for buying into a gerontocracy, because I find it very doubtful that you can win over many of those retired voters anyway, you know?
Yeah, it's true. I mean, back in my day, I had to scrape by. I got nothing. I think a lot of people these days who are saddled with student debt, can't get on the housing ladder, renting for the rest of their lives, will be happy to start off with nothing, because people are starting in debt. That's what they're starting off with. So, pensioners, count yourself lucky. Let's move on. But before we go on to our last section of the budgets, just want to say, before we continue, we would like to remind our viewers that we're just 5 volunteers keeping the ship going. We do this around our paid jobs. Our goal is to become full-time, meaning we can increase our content, be far more ambitious, and build a sustainable left-wing alternative. Your help has made so much of a difference already, from equipment to covering rallies and interviews. Your support means everything. Now, we rely on small donations, so if you want to be part of a media organisation that seeks to destroy the oligarchs, then please head over to turnleftmedia.co.uk/support. There you can support us monthly on Patreon, or there is another link for a one-time contribution. You can also become a YouTube member for 99p. We also want to announce that we have an exclusive live streaming of Zara Sultana's Eve of Your Party conference. The event will include speakers from unions and left organisations. You can watch it live right here from 8 p.m. Now, what's so great about that is on Friday, Helena is going to be on Bold Politics. One of our celebs in real life is on Bold Politics. So exciting. That's at 7 p.m. I think Navarra's on at 6. You've got 3 hours of political, maybe 4 hours, because I think we might be going for 2 hours. 4 hours of some political shows for you. But make sure you go watch No Justice on Bold Politics. And then don't miss our show straight after that. But let's go on to the final part. Rachel Reeves has announced that energy bills will be cut by £150 per year by removing the ECO. We've got graphic 15 on there. There we go. Here we go. The energy company obligation, which forces energy companies to pay for measures like insulation and new heating systems for low-income households, and will be scrapped in April 2026, Reeves said. The ECO scheme came under scrutiny last month after the National Audit Office warned of potential fraud and poor quality work being undertaken under the programme. Now, this is what Rachel Reeves said in Parliament. The Conservatives' ECO, the Energy Company Obligation Scheme, was presented as a plan to tackle fuel poverty. It costs household $1.7 billion a year on their bills, and for 97% of families in fuel poverty, the scheme has cost them more than it has saved. It is a failed scheme. So I am scrapping that scheme along with taking other legacy costs of bills. And as a result, I can tell you that today, for every family, we are keeping our promise to get energy bills down and cut the cost of living with a £150 cut from average household energy bills from April. Now, it feels a little dishonest by saying that she's cutting bills. Instead, she's removing an obligation for companies to pay for insulation. I mean, bills could still rise overall and companies will still make record profits. Now, early on today, I spoke to Hannah Martin, co-director of Green New Deal Rising. So I want to get your view on Rachel Reeves cutting the energy company obligation. She says this will automatically reduce bills by £150 per year, which is obviously removing the obligation for companies to pay for insulation and heating systems. What do you make of this?
So I think there's a few things to say. One of which is, I mean, that scheme did definitely need reform. It needed stricter rules to stop things like shoddy work by kind of cowboy installers. But actually, when you look in the round, scrapping it outright is going to prove probably counterproductive. Some of the stats I've got in front of me, it made 15 million homes more efficient, saving the average home £7,500. And in general, you know, we need desperately insulation programs in this country, and we need funding for those programs. Without the funding, you run the risk of leaving millions in fuel poverty, trapped in cold, damp homes. I mean, in the UK, we have some of the leakiest homes in Europe, and we could actually cut energy demand in homes by 25%. But without some sort of major insulation program with funding attached to it, that's not going to happen. And I think, you know, the sort of broader point is that in general, it's not a bad thing to necessarily move levies for that kind of funding into general taxation. But that only works if you don't then cut the funding for those schemes, which is what has happened. So I think, you know, in general, it wouldn't be necessary to make those kinds of cuts if Rachel Reeves was looking at things like wealth taxes or other ways of raising revenue without needing to sort of make arbitrary cuts to important programs that will, over the long term, cut bills, reduce demand on energy, reduce our carbon impact because we're using less fuel, etc., etc. So I think in general, it's a pretty bad thing.
Is this kind of a bait and switch then? Because she claims it's cutting energy bills, but rather it's cutting an obligation that companies have to pay. So one, it doesn't guarantee that bills could come down, because some companies might be like, well, we're just going to increase the bills by £150 a year. You know, there's nothing stopping them. And two, when it comes to poorer households, they rely on insulation to be fitted. So
exactly. And
overall,
I think in
does
general,
this mean could it go up for people? The bills
well,
could
we need
potentially
to
go up.
remember that energy bills are governed by lots of things. And I think that in general, there are other ways we could be looking to cut our energy bills that aren't being looked at. So some of the things that have been talked about recently is like moving gas power stations into kind of strategic reserve, so that our electricity prices aren't set by very expensive gas, or we're not relying on gas lines from kind of autocratic regimes like Russia, or slashing leasing costs for offshore wind. Those are kind of two guaranteed ways to cut bills even more. And then you're building an energy system that is kind of secure, is fit for the future, and is based on renewable energy, which is kind of cleaner and better for the climate as well. So we do need to bring energy bills down while we're transitioning to a kind of renewables future. But there are other ways to do it that are maybe a bit more secure and don't hurt poorer families who, like you say, need insulation. We generally speaking need more funding for insulation programs across the UK.
What do you make of the government freezing fuel duty for 5 months, but at the same time adding taxes for electric vehicles? I mean, I'm kind of ambivalent when it comes to electric vehicles, because I think the real progressive transport is public transportation. Maybe that's a different conversation. But Rachel is signalling to those that drive cars with petrol in it, you get another freeze for 5 months, and then we're adding taxes on electric vehicles, which, I mean, electric vehicles is better than using petrol. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think in general, the fuel duty freeze has been a very regressive policy, and it's good to see that actually that will hopefully come to an end. I mean, there's always a chance that they're just kicking the can down the road by not lifting the freeze immediately, when actually we do need to be disincentivizing the use of fossil fuels. But I think you can't implement policies like that without massively investing in public transport. So actually, I don't think it is a different conversation. I think it's the same conversation, whether that's investing in buses. I mean, it's good that they've frozen rail fares. It's good that they're bringing the railways into public ownership. We should be looking at public ownership of buses as well, of all types of kind of public transport, incentivizing slow travel, incentivizing bike to work schemes. They've also done a random small cut on bicycles to work, things like that don't make sense across the whole picture. You need to be thinking about how to ensure that people can make the best choices for themselves in terms of cost, but also in terms of, a healthy climate in the long run. And so it's good to scrap the freeze on fuel duty, but we need a mass investment in public transport as well. And not just in the cities. We actually need to be thinking about rural access to public transport. I think anyone who's tried to travel from east to west, for example, on the train will know that that's a really difficult thing to do. I mean, it's difficult to travel from east to west sometimes in cities as well, certainly in London. But I think that, we need to think about a kind of a UK-wide investment in public transport at the same time as disincentivizing using, cars powered by fossil fuels. I think there's no way around that. We do need that to come down as we transition away from fossil fuels.
So Green New Deal Rising has now campaigned on a whole host of issues, but one of the latest campaigns is wealth tax. I mean, wealth tax has really been put on the agenda, whether it's Zach Polansky, whether it's some people inside the Labour Party. Something that seems to be missing from the budget was a sweeping wealth tax, essentially. There were little sort of property taxes here and there, but a big wealth tax wasn't there. Tell me about GND and the wealth tax campaign.
Thanks. So yeah, we've been running a campaign called Pay Up. We've been campaigning on wealth taxes for a number of years, but we launched Pay Up to specifically draw attention to some of the richest in society who we feel are not paying their fair share, whether that's the Duke of Westminster, who owns like half of London, or Denise Coates, who made her millions off of gambling companies that are ruining lives, or Jim Ratcliffe, who's a fossil fuel magnate. These are some of the people that actually are avoiding paying, or not avoid. I mean, I'm sure they're kind of not being asked to pay what we consider as their fair share by the government. And so we were campaigning for a series of wealth taxes, things like a 2% tax on people that have assets of £10 million or more per year, but also closing loopholes. At the moment, if you're a teacher and you earn £40,000 a year, you will pay around £1,000 more in tax per year than somebody who earns the same amount selling stocks and shares. So if you just sit or you just are trading on the stock market, you're paying less tax if you make the same amount as a teacher per annum. And so a teacher's obviously working, in my opinion, much harder in our public school system, but they're paying more tax. And that doesn't make any sense. And so there's things like the equalisation of capital gains tax with income tax, making sure that we're taxing the sort of trading of things like shares properly. And also things like making sure that polluters pay properly, which is also a kind of tax in our minds, for things like, water companies cleaning up sewage properly, or like fossil fuel companies extending the windfall tax to make it permanent on oil and gas companies, for example. So there are lots of ways that we could think about taxation and our tax system that not only serve to raise much needed cash to pay for hospitals, schools, climate action, the transition away from fossil fuels towards renewables, insulation programs, all of the things that we need to sort of thrive, but also to look at them as a means of reducing inequality, because actually we have a hugely unequal society at the moment. 1 in 3 children are in poverty right now in the UK, which is just a staggering figure, really. And we have a huge concentration of wealth at the very top of society, and that's been only exponentially growing since COVID. And so I think that, looking at our tax system, yes, as a revenue raising mechanism, but also as a way of stopping these massive kind of grotesque inequalities from getting out of control. So yeah, we've been campaigning for that. I mean, I think that it was a massive missed opportunity. I think that a lot of people are going to experience this budget as yet again choosing to ask ordinary working people to pay rather than the super rich. And, her ducking out of taxing banks at the last minute, or, I think those things are clear signals that this is a government that is not working for the majority of people and their communities and the things that they're worried about at the end of the day, at the end of the month, but is letting itself be guided by, the interests of a few super rich individuals and corporations. And that is, I think, borne out by how people are responding to them, how deeply unpopular they are. And I think that is unfortunately paving the way for the likes of Reform to come in and take advantage of that moment and say to people, well, here's someone else you can blame as well, and kind of feed off of that gap in leadership and in kind of political integrity, really. So yeah, it's a real shame, and I think that they're going to continue to be punished for it in the polls. But we're going to keep fighting for wealth taxes. We think they're an important part of how you win a Green New Deal, how you build a fairer society, and how you reduce inequality at large.
So if you want to transition to, a proper, true green economy, I appreciate you might not see the policies in the budget. They're more sort of policies for a manifesto. What big policies would you like to see implemented from a government that takes climate change seriously?
I mean, I think it starts with an intention to mobilise every sector in your economy towards that transition. And, when we say the Green New Deal, we're really drawing on the idea of the New Deal, that kind of Rooseveltian investment in every part of society where millions of good jobs were created through, upgrading infrastructure and upgrading not just infrastructure that kind of we understand, when we say that word, we think of kind of railways and building things. And that is part of it as well. But it's also about public services. It's about the things you can't see, about the care economy. It's about even looking at, public programs around art and things like that. And I think that taking that sort of visionary approach to the transition would be a way of investing in people and in the public services that we all deserve, really. So I think, when you look at the Green New Deal, some of the policies we talk about are green jobs for all. So thinking about how many green jobs could you create? And we would include in the definition of a green job things like care work. If you paid it well, it's a really low carbon, low impact job in terms of a kind of negative impact on the climate, very high impact job in terms of what we need in society to function and to live well together and to look after one another. But those jobs are vastly underpaid. They're often, they're privatized, and so they're not publicly owned, they're not publicly protected as a kind of workforce. So you think about the kinds of, when we think about a green job, we think about, what is an expansive definition of that. So providing good green jobs for all, things like a national nature service to restore and protect our natural spaces, but also to provide good jobs in nature restoration, in rewilding, in, stewardship of our natural resources. We would look at things like a mass rollout of insulation in every home, a mass rollout of renewable power, solar panels on every roof, thinking really expansively about the opportunities for building out public transport, as I mentioned, but also thinking about the cost of those. So, something like free buses would massively impact, the types of working people who use the bus to get to work. That would massively impact their lives and put money back in their pockets in the middle of a cost of living crisis. So these are the kinds of policies we've been campaigning for. Also thinking about our international obligations and the responsibility we bear as a kind of historic emitter, not just through the Industrial Revolution, but also through kind of colonialism and the UK's role in expanding fossil fuels all over the world. I think looking at those obligations, taking them seriously and thinking about what we can do to repair the kind of global consensus and support other countries to transition in their own pathway as well. That's a core part of it for us.
That was Hannah Martin, co-director of Green New Deal Rising. Really good interview that was. I think it's time to bring in the comments. I know you've got some really good ones here. Let's bring in Callum Taylor. Come on, Callum, as our producer. How are we?
Hello, I'm all right. How are you?
Very good. It's been such a brilliant show, and I love listening to Helena's rants and analysis. It's always a good show when Helena's on.
It always is. It's fantastic. I was just saying behind the scenes before, I always feel like I learn something from Helena, and you're good at changing people's views because you explain things in a really simple and easy to understand way where it just makes sense. And there's been lots of comments to say exactly that as well. We'll look at Michael here. Helena is always an education for at least me every time. Thank goodness for her and her intellect. So always good to have you, Helena.
Oh God, I feel like I have such a responsibility now. I'm forming the opinions of people.
You are. You are. Just before we continue with comments, let's just look at some of the super chats. So we've got Specs gifted 510 left memberships. Thank you so much for that. Welcome to Doc Davis, to Steve, to Cymru, to Sortus Gausace, is that? And to Elwido as well. And Rachel sent a $2 super chat. Zero sum game theory is like a religion to neolibs. Do you have anything to say about that?
Oh yeah,
Capitalism
agree.
is like a religion as well. Neoliberalism and also capitalism is like a religion. I've always found.
Well, the irony is that neoliberals always talk about the idea of the rising tide lifting all of the boats, right? This idea that you can grow the size of the pie, and yet
I hate that argument.
The monetarist groupthink is precisely the opposite of this. It was the Keynesian consensus that was about, deficit spending in downturns to try and ensure that you maintain growth so that you didn't have a broadly declining economy. And it's the neolibs who kind of want to go back to the fucking gold standard, which is literally zero sum. It's so frustrating.
Mm-hmm. Leo's said, surplus isn't a good thing. This isn't a household budget. Surplus means that we aren't investing in the economy. We are in debt to the banks that we keep bailing out. Go after the £1 trillion the USA owe us.
I mean, it's what Zach made a whole host of arguments on Laura Koonsberg, but I'm glad he talks about multiplier effects and positive externalities when you spend money. My favorite all-time line will always be Yanis Varoufakis on Question Time, when someone was in the audience was like, right, basically, politicians need to get a grip. If I spend £10, right, that means I've got £10 left. If I don't spend £10, I've got more £10 more in my pocket. Easy as. Of course, it wasn't as simple as that. And then Yanis Varoufakis expertly says there is complete independence between expenditure and income for us lot. We can spend less money and we save money. But when it comes to government macroeconomics, total expenditure literally means income. Like, if we stop spending money on anything, it doesn't mean we save money. What that means is we sucked money out of the economy, but also public services wouldn't happen. Society would literally shut down. How do you create tax receipts? You create them by creating jobs. How do you do that? By investing in infrastructure. And that will always be my favorite line that sticks in my head.
Literally. Look at Patricia Pino is making a good point on Twitter the other day, which is that one of the problems we have is that we aren't at full capacity in terms of the economy, and that shows that we're not spending enough, i.e. there is unemployment in this society and the economy. These people are a resource that can be tapped to increase the supply of goods and services. Likewise is true of the people who are sick, who are too disabled because they're on NHS waiting lists. That's justification for expansionary policy on increasing NHS provision to get these people back into the workforce producing things to increase the supply of things in the economy. There is plenty of slack that can be motivated by targeted government spending. And as has been pointed out, because we're not investing enough to get these people into work.
I found myself agreeing, I can't believe it, with Paul Embry. Paul Embry, because he correctly said, he brought up Keynes. He said, anything we can do, we can afford. And then he underneath it said, the government is not like a household budget. Unfortunately, his views on social stuff is fucked, but credit, he's not lying about the economy.
I wanted to ask Helena, actually, just because the household budget thing is obviously something that Zach talks about quite a bit. There's been a lot of talk today about how the bond markets have responded to everything. Lots of talks about bonds and markets and the awful economic system that we live in. I just wondered, I know you've covered this I imagine you will have covered this on your own channel, but what was your response to the reaction to Zach's comments on, I think it might have been the Channel 4 podcast that he was on recently. I think it was possibly that, or it could have been Laura Kuenssberg, where he said that essentially we shouldn't be in hock to the bond markets because that's not democratic, and that we should be, focusing on the voters and what they want. Because obviously a lot of the sort of establishment types have been pretty spooked by those comments that he made. I just wondered what your reaction was to that.
So I reacted to that whole debate on my YouTube channel, which you can go and watch in your own time. Sneaky little plug there. But
at No Justice MTG and all socials.
True. I kind of fall in the middle, I guess, with this kind of discussion, insofar as there are a lot of really good arguments that Zach was making about utilizing real resources, using government expansionary policy to be able to motivate them, to be able to increase the supply of goods and services, to grow the economy, thereby negating any additional demand factors that you'll have from increasing the money supply. That's fine. I'd certainly agree with that. When it comes to being in hock to the bond markets, he's taking an Andy Burnham phrase and misunderstanding what Andy Burnham was saying. Andy Burnham is saying is we are reliant on the bonds to lend the government money because we've sold off too many assets. It used to be the case. The government got loads of revenue from the SEOs, the state-owned enterprises that were owned by the state, that generated revenue that funded some level of state expenditure. Insofar as we are borrowing money for government expenditure because we have sold off so much of the state capacity to the private sector. That's the argument that Andy was making about the continual reliance on the bond market for government expenditure. The difference when it comes to the argument that Zach is making is this idea that you don't need to issue bonds to spend money. And that's true. That's fundamentally true. The government can create money whenever it wants because we are a sovereign currency issuer. Of course, there is one difference, which is that if you want people to buy bonds, if you want people to hold bonds, if you want those bonds to still be worth something, you have to keep the currency value high for the existing bondholders, for the confidence in the economy. A currency crisis is actually the real thing that's the problem, and that can be linked to inflation. It can be linked to an excess of supply of the currency. I don't think we're anywhere close to a currency crisis. And in fact, the big thing that's close to causing a currency crisis is the fact that we are doing too much quantitative tightening from the Bank of England. But that's a different story. When he's asked these questions about how will the bond markets react, the real answer is, well, if you want to do bond spending, what the bonds are looking for is a return on the investment. It's not a specific structure of the economy. They're not looking for a specific policy prospectus that's necessarily right wing. What they're looking for is to understand that they'll make a return on the bond that they've bought. And as long as you have a good story, as long as you can tell the bond buyers, this is why we're doing all this expansionary policy, this is how we'll guarantee a return on your investment if you're a bondholder, because we're going to get all these people who are unfit for work to be fit for work by spending on the NHS. We're going to do this industrial strategy, investing in all the machinery of the future, green energy. It's going to reduce the costs for businesses, which is going to spark business investment because we've reduced the energy costs that are so higher than other countries in Europe. We're going to spend on welfare for people to get them happier and healthier, and that's going to increase productivity, and that's how we can guarantee a return on your investment. It doesn't matter if you're breaking a fiscal rule, as long as they believe that story, there'll be confidence in your economy. Right? It's not necessarily this kind of mathematical equation that Rachel Reeves got, but she's boxed herself in. She has fiscal rules that's set by OBR predictions. If she tomorrow said, we're getting rid of the OBR, we're getting rid of the fiscal rules, the markets would go, this looks unstable. But if there wasn't a set fiscal rules or an OBR in the first place, they'd be having to set it on what the Chancellor was saying, which is basically what they're doing now, but with this extra caveat, which is unnecessary.
Yeah, if you come in with the rules preset, then you're basically saying to the bondholders, this is what we're aiming to do, and if we do anything that isn't like this or that deviates from this, then everything's gone to shit and it's all unstable. Whereas if you come in,
confidence.
Yeah, whereas if you come in and say, we're doing away with those rules from the offset and those aren't the rules that we're going to run by anymore, but don't worry because this is why we're doing it, then it will respond differently. No, thanks for explaining that way. That's really helpful. Go on,
It's
Cass.
ironic that Andy Burnham is more correct than Zach Polanski, because I wasn't in favor. I didn't really like the answer from Zach when because it felt like he was very dismissive. He said, "Don't worry about the bond markets because the people democratically elected me to do this." I didn't find that convincing, because then a lot of people said, "Oh, well, clearly economics doesn't matter. It's what the people want." But actually, as Helena explained, Andy Burnham set out a better argument. But it's really strange because it's like collective hive mind on the wrong thing. Like, spending too much money isn't bad, but if you have politicians, you have the Bank of England or people within it, if you have investors who think that's the thing, then that's how people respond. It's like manifesting your own reality. And that's why you kind of have to, it's really important to have these open discussions and to take on the zeitgeist of mainstream economics, which is still, we're very far away. I do think Zach largely is doing a good deal on that, doing a good job on it. But we need like the collective hive mind to think differently, because we're manifesting neoliberalism, we're manifesting austerity, treasury brain think.
There is also
sorry, one point I will make as well, sorry, before we move on, is that this is what was going to be done by John McDonnell. So they had this plan for the People's Quantitative Easing, which is essentially just selling bonds directly to the Bank of England, monetary financing government deficits, printing money, whatever you want to call it. And because Richard Murphy was an economic advisor to John McDonnell at the time. And John McDonnell just went to the bond markets, went to bond traders, and just said, this is our plan. If we get into government, this is what we're going to do. This is how we'll guarantee you an investment. They were doing everything that Zach Polanski, like they plan to do a bunch of the things, the bond-free spending that Zach Polanski is talking about right now. They had a story for the bond markets, and that's what they did. It's really simple. That was what Labour were planning to do in 2017, 2019.
I think the other point here as well is that the vast majority of the public don't understand any of these things. They don't really care. Like if they hear politicians talking about bond yields and how market reactions and things, the average voter is like, what the fuck does that mean? Like, I don't care about that. People care about, do they feel better off? Have they got more money in their pocket? Can they afford to eat? Can they afford to heat their homes? Have they got enough money to put to put fuel in the car to get, or to charge up the car if it's an electric vehicle, to get out to work, to earn money to feed the family and so on? Like, people care about whether they have got enough to survive, and hopefully a little bit extra too. They're not really interested in some economic theory and some multimillionaire who happens to have a stake somewhere that may or may not affect the economy. I think the biggest shock for a lot of people was the fact that when we had the Liz Truss mini budget, just how two politicians could stand in the House of Commons, deliver a speech, and then people's mortgages were 3 times higher than they were the day before, like purely through speaking something out loud.
Well,
You know,
Callum, there
it's
was,
insane.
It's a really important part of what I was saying before about telling the story to the bond markets.
Yeah.
Liz Truss did not do this.
Yeah.
They announced a fiscal event on the day before it happened, announced a bunch of shit they'd not trailed beforehand and not had these conversations. And the bond markets went, shit, the government doesn't know what it's doing. They've not told us what it's doing. We are worried about our investment. Because they had no story. There's also the problem that quantitative tightening happened at the same time, which reduced the value of the bonds and increased the yield almost overnight. And the pension funds were over leveraged on these things called liability-driven investments. They got margin called on the bonds they were holding, and the value was down. And that's why the Bank of England had to bail them out, right? But Kwasi Kwarteng was the fucking chancellor. It is your job as chancellor to know whether or not the pension funds are over leveraged, and he didn't know that. He announced a bunch of shit that caused bond yields to spike overnight because there was no plan, no rolling of the pitch, so to speak, and no OBR kind of buy-in from
So-
this. They had the framework of the OBR already in place, right? The Osborneite framework, and they just undermined it. And it shows what would happen if Rachel Reeves just ditched that tomorrow, you know?
So politics aside then, because I mean there's a whole other conversations that we can have about the politics of what Liz Truss wanted to do. Had Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng, had they sold the stories to the bond markets beforehand, do you think, you know, things could have worked out differently for the Liz Truss government?
Yeah, I think they would have been not like they still would have been some kind of adverse reaction, but it wouldn't have been this overnight economic collapse. Like, people lost tens of thousands of pounds of value from their pension funds. My parents lost tens of thousands of pounds of value from their pension provision because of the Liz Truss mini budget overnight, because they didn't bother, again, rolling the pitch, so to speak. They didn't bother trailing their plans at any point. They just came into the House of Commons, said, we're massively increasing spending on the energy price guarantee, and we're massively slashing taxation by getting rid of an entire fucking tax band. You know, it was an absolute fucking car crash.
I mean, you can't separate the politics and the economics though, because when Rachel Reeves was crying in not Prime Minister's questions, but when she was crying in Parliament, the markets had a wobble, and of course, you know, Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves were like, oh, it's because they're so scared that she's going to go. She's so sensible. It wasn't even that. It's because they didn't know who was going to replace her. They didn't know there's going to be a different set of policies. Like, it's that simple. Just something as crying in Parliament can spook the markets, because fundamentally it's about certainty and stability. That's all it is, which is why, as once again Helena points out, John McDonnell goes to the City of London and says, this is my long-term plan. They would rather pay more taxes and have a stable economy than tax cuts and have an unstable economy and spook the markets. It's very simple.
Yeah,
exactly, 100%. I mean, if anything, stability is the issue, is what is important here. That people they are asking for stability. Rachel Reeves crying looked unstable. Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng certainly
wasn't
showed instability, right?
Yeah, so much for strong and stable.
So I think that moving to a 1-year budgets rather than 6-month budgets that Labour did under Rachel Reeves is a good move.
Yeah, I agree with Michael. When I grow up, I want to be as clever as Helena. I'm older than her. Chiba Sonic has said, blimey, near 40 years ago, I was getting £2.80 an hour at Safeways when I was 17. It's mad that it's not even tripled today. And Curtis, you and I had a brief chat about this earlier today, didn't we? About the disparity between 18 to 21 and over 21, and with the differences in the wages for being paid. In fact, we mentioned it on the show tonight. I think I'm right. Helena will know that Labour pledged last year's budget to scrap that altogether, didn't they? I think that Labour's aim long term is to bring minimum wage in line the same for everybody else. That is still their plan, isn't it?
I do remember. I'll have to check.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I think it was, but is that not something they could be doing a bit quicker? Like, can they not just? I don't like what's stopping them from doing that.
I guess because some businesses already have like P&Ls already kind of projected for another like 2 years potentially, and a massive increase in an outlay in terms of workers' wages could cause insolvencies.
Right,
like,
okay.
Yeah, I mean, like it's not. Businesses won't like getting rid of the age brackets, right? I think because actually, Callum, what you said to me earlier makes more sense because I was very angry that they haven't got rid of it, but then you did say, look, aren't they slowly doing it? Because the youngest are getting a higher increase as opposed to 25 years and over. So I guess like a long-term slowing of the gap might work, but also I think to those that say, because obviously the reason why they do it is to say, well, it gives young people jobs, doesn't it? But I don't think I believe that argument. I don't buy it largely because if you look at the types of jobs young people gravitate towards, when it's hospitality, when it's retail, right, they employ younger people anywhere. You're not going to get a 45-year-old, 50-year-old, or typically a 50-year-old bloke selling clothes at River Island. I used to work at River Island, right? It was mainly 16, 17, 18-year-olds coming from university. And if they got rid of the age brackets, right, you're not going to suddenly get like 50-year-olds then coming in because they're more experienced. Because if you're 50 years old, you probably have more prospects than earning more than minimum wage in River Island. And that's just the case. So I think it's largely overblown, but I suppose the business community might not react to it favorably if it's done overnight. But I really hate it though.
Again, it's something for young people. Therefore, our population is like already negatively polarized towards it.
Yeah. But I absolutely hate it. You do the labor, you do the same work, you deserve to get paid the same as someone else doing it. But especially I've seen some fucking idiot 17-year-olds, but I've also seen some fucking idiot 50-year-olds. I've seen some fantastically bright and amazing 18-year-olds who are doing a great job. And yeah, it really, really angers me, the difference in age pay.
Sal Maunsley has said, I work and sometimes I have to pay for prescriptions on credit card. I just wanted to use this just to highlight to anyone that isn't aware that the NHS do have a prescription prepay certificate that you can get if you're someone who has multiple prescriptions, where you can do it, I think, sort of in 3-month bursts where you pay about 30 quid for 3 months, or you can pay monthly. I think I pay something like £12 a month or something, and it basically gives you access to unlimited prescriptions. So you pay for the prepaid certificate, and then you can get as many prescriptions as you need.
You
so
pay for each one.
yeah, so if you're someone that has like 3 or 4 different types of medication that you have to take on a monthly basis, you're not paying 40 quid every time. The pharmacies will not tell you about this unless you ask them. Sometimes they do have posters up, but it's rare that they'll tell you to do it. But yeah, if you're someone like me that has multiple medications and spends more than if you pay for more than 2 prescriptions a month, it's absolutely worth looking into. So yeah, I just wanted to use that comment just to highlight that for anyone that wasn't aware of that. Michael's made an interesting comment about the Motability scheme. What are the cars that will be available? MG, Vauxhall, and Nissan, some of the most unreliable cars and expensive in the long term. False economy. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Because there's definitely, to me, that just makes pure sense. If we're gonna start dishing out the cheaper cars, the cars that cost more to run in the long term, that have more problems with them, the Motability scheme is going to end up paying for that, aren't they?
I mean, I'm not an expert on motoring, so I can give you a proper comment. What I will say is that Motability is one of the biggest buyers of new cars in this country. In fact, the proportion of new cars that are bought by Motability has continually increased as people have been less able to afford new cars themselves. It is a big injection of second-hand cars into the very burgeoning second-hand market in this country, and so the second-hand cars probably be a lot more expensive when this scheme goes.
Yeah, there's been so much misinformation about Motability as well. I've got family who work for Motability, and the first story sort of arises like they're sitting on all this money. First of all, it's their assets. They don't have any liquidity, or not much of it anyway. But there's my family, those that work for Motability, have been so angry at the misinformation that's been spreaded by largely the right-wing media. What's also funny is that there's so many cars that share parts. You'll open up a bonnet of a Nissan and you could find an engine from Ford or whatever. So I mean, the focus on the make is really funny because it's probably not even the engine; it's something else. But it doesn't matter. Just get the basic car on need, and that's it.
Yeah, 100%. Legala de Ville has legal. Is it legal La de Ville or is it Legala de Ville? I never know how to pronounce your name.
Legala de Ville.
Legala de Ville. You listen to LBC one painful day, and you discover how many elderly people don't believe their state benefit, their state pension is a benefit. I work on the Family Resources Survey, which is a DWP survey around income and cost of living and people's sort of incomings and outgoings. And one of the questions that we ask people is are you in receipt of any of the following state benefits? And it always amazes me how many people of pension age immediately say, oh no, I don't get any benefits, before I've even read the list out. And I think number 4 on the list is the state pension. And it always surprises them that it's
included. They go, it's not a benefit.
Sometimes they do. It always surprises them that it's included in the benefits. It's like, well, yeah, it is.
I think it's the biggest increase in the welfare bill.
Yeah.
The balloon welfare bill.
It's the biggest part of it.
Yeah. But I've worked all my life and paid in for it.
Fucking scroungers.
Yeah. No, that one always gets me. Although Phil said in response to that, it's because it was never framed as a benefit. National insurance was an insurance against illness, unemployment, and old age, a safety net that we all contributed to access when in need.
That's true. It's important to point out that that's a framing, right? I'm glad that, because the thing is that that's just, whilst it was framed that way, that's just never been the case. National insurance has always just been a payroll tax. It is just a generalized payroll tax that everybody who works will pay. But obviously, there's a qualification for the state pension, but that's not because the national insurance is contributing to the money that you then take out with the state pension. It's a qualifier to show that you have enough time in the country being a taxpayer to justify you getting access to the welfare state, right? It's nothing to do with a contributory scheme.
I mean, I would, in a way, probably be happy to frame everything as a benefit. I would happy to say the NHS is a benefit, because I think people might then change their minds a bit. Because in a way, it's kind of a benefit, because people might be like, well, I technically pay into it, but like usually you pay the people before you, and then the people
I can promise you that I've definitely had more out of the NHS than what I've paid in.
Exactly.
In terms of the cost of the service that I've received over the years. Definitely. I think a lot of people will have done.
It is so weird how like benefits seems to be the one sector of public spending where people will measure it against how much tax they've paid. It doesn't happen with anything else. Like I do not have kids. I will never have kids ever. And yet, at no point have I gone, oh, well, look how much of my taxes is going on the education budget. And I'm like, well, obviously, there's a like a holistic utility to having an educated population, just like there is having an educated population.
Well, it was,
don't worry, the IEA will probably make that argument, though.
It was all the right-wing commentators that were out on Twitter today. I think you responded to one of them, Curtis, that were I think Camilla Tominey was one of them, complaining about her and Julia Hartley Brewer, all the usual suspects, complaining about the fact that our taxpayers' money is paying for all these families to have more children. And it's like, well, yeah, if my tax is going to go to lifting 400,000, 450,000, I think is the most recent estimate, children out of poverty, which Labour should have done when they first got into power, by the way, rather than suspending 7 MPs for voting for that, but that's a whole other thing, then I'm absolutely fine with my money being spent on that. Even if I haven't got children, or if I do have children and those children are not living in poverty, you can still take my tax to help the kids out who are.
The thing is, even if there wasn't an economic multiplier, I would still support it. Luckily, there is an economic multiplier. You have to explain this to people. Like, I'm gonna imagine a world where no kids are in poverty. I'm gonna offer you an opportunity to pay to put kids in poverty. Would you take that? And they'll go no. And I'm like, okay, so you shouldn't support the 2-child cap on universal credit, because you're going to pay for it. Any money that you don't pay now, you will pay double down the line when those poor kids become unhealthy adults who rely on a welfare state that is significantly more than the extra that you're currently paying for their universal credit payment for child benefit, right? Like that, you're going to pay more. They're going to be sick. They're going to grow up and be less productive, and the economy is going to be worse. That's how spending multipliers work. So what you're doing is you're paying money to put kids in poverty. And that's the only way you can get these people to understand, Or they'll say, well, we shouldn't be incentivizing bigger families. Well, good thing that the 2-child benefit cap didn't cause a disfertility effect. It didn't. It didn't cause people to change their family planning at all. This incentive, the structure that they claim that they don't want to fund into, never existed. It never existed.
Cymru said, would this removal of the triple lock go well with another policy? This was the conversation we were having about pensions. National Social Care System, for example, Plaid Cymru are pushing this policy where many pensioners get eaten out of house and a home due to care. Yeah.
Yeah. Much
Absolutely.
better.
It was part of the Labour's national policy
was-
forum
it
in the
was,
run up
wasn't
to the
it? Yeah.
election, and that got ditched real fucking quick. And now they've got a consultation with this will last 3 years, and they'll kick the
quango
can down the
again.
road, just like New Labour did, just like Theresa May did, right? Like constant kicking down the road of our failing social care system.
Yeah.
Although it is worth remembering what this person said, which is that Boomers just worked harder than all the generations younger than them combined.
Oh shit! Yeah, no, you're right. Actually,
Let's not forget
Helena,
that.
You missed that argument. You didn't think about that, did you?
It's also worth pointing out as well is that even if you, I don't think you can quantify who worked harder necessarily.
Yeah.
But it's worth pointing out that the return of the economy to labour, the amount that labour is remunerated as opposed to capital, is way more in favour of capital now than it was then. That's the big kind of difference, I think. There, you see the line where you see the decoupling of productivity with
Yes.
wages in the 1980s. You know, that's the big issue here, and of course, house price inflation too.
There was lots of people on complaining on LBC this week about the proposed plans for, the so-called mansion tax. All saying how, well, we work hard for our money, and we as a family, we've worked hard to earn the money. And I'm like, yeah, so what? You've worked 40, 50 hours a week, just like somebody who's on minimum wage, who also works 40, 50 hours a week, but can't afford a £2 million house.
But you can't. But you can't quantify work with asset appreciation. In fact, actually, no, you can quantify it 0. Because when assets appreciate, that's not you working harder. That's you doing absolutely nothing. And luckily, the market has rewarded you.
But
with
even
house
if
prices going up,
even
so
if
say,
you sorry, Curtis, but even if you went out today and bought a house today that was worth £2 million now, and you bought it at that price, if you're working 50 hours a week, you still can't argue that you're working any harder than, a janitor in the hospital that's also working 50 hours a week, except they're never going to be able to afford a £2 million house because they're on minimum wage, whereas you're getting paid £150 an hour. Like,
But
do you know
people
what I mean?
seem to think that the things that they own in their life was through their hard work. And sure, it is. Buying a house are good for you, but it was a result of hard work of how much you pay for that house at that time. In 20 years' time, when the asset appreciates, right, you did 0 extra work, and you literally expect money for doing nothing. And the idea that, okay, maybe that's not right, we should tax a little bit of that, people lose their minds. But when it comes to inheritance tax, people lose their fucking mind. And I'm like, inheritance tax, I don't care. I don't care that it was passed down through your family. If you believe in a meritocracy that's massive capitalists and right-wingers say they believe in, then you would believe in 100% inheritance tax. Because everyone starts from 0. Everyone starts from the beginning.
Yeah.
I think it's crazy. I mean, look, I actually would not oppose an 100% inheritance tax, because guess what? Inheritance tax is basically feudalism. If you're a capitalist, right, then support fucking capitalism. Stop supporting feudalism. But no, capitalists just want to protect feudalism.
And people across the political spectrum have this crazy opinion, right? Like on being mad about inheritance tax. I did a segment with Michael Walker on Novara Media when we both were in favour of inheritance tax, responding to Lewis Goodall triggering.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah,
and people were in the comments going, "I'm cancelling my subscription to Novara because you support inheritance tax." And I'm just like, what fucking planet do you live on?
Everyone hates it. It's so.
Also, I saw so many comments going, "Oh well, it's just because you're not going to inherit anything that you want to take from people who are. I'm going to inherit like 6 figures worth of housing equity. My parents' house was one of the ones that was bought cheaply in the 90s that has massively accelerated in value. I will pay probably 6 figures of inheritance tax at some point in my life. Hopefully not very soon. I would gladly pay more because I've not earned it. Yeah. I've not earned any of that fucking money."
And just to highlight Vicky's comment, nowadays people work hard to buy other people's houses. We were just talking about that, weren't we?
Absolutely. That's just fundamentally, Vicky, that is how it is. To completely simplify it, people are working so they can buy other people's houses, and not just through renting, but by taxation, as Helena once again points out. Income taxes then goes on to helping pensioners out. It's fucking crazy. The social contract has broken down. It's been utterly smashed to pieces.
We should probably wrap up. I'm just aware of time, but I could. There's plenty more.
I'm
we
having
could
fun.
talk about.
I'm not going anywhere to go.
Well, let's just have a look. So we've had some more turn left memberships
Yeah.
gifted as well from a couple of different people. So thank you both for doing that. Welcome to everyone that's got a membership as a result of those. Yeah, this is Leo's comment that you mentioned when we were
Yes,
at it, which was that around 80% of pensioners own their home outright, and they may not have their own income, but this group isn't generally living paycheck to paycheck, unlike the rest of the UK. You've got to bear in mind, you've got if you're a homeowner but you're paying a mortgage, you've got mortgage payments. If you're renting, you've got your rental payments. If your home's paid for and you own it outright, regardless of the value of the home, that's one bill that you don't have to worry about. So while everybody else is struggling to keep up with the cost of living and having to pay, anywhere from, I don't know, £500 to £2,000 in mortgage payments or rent payments, but it's often more, pensioners haven't got that bill.
It's true. And also, like, if pensioners don't own their own homes and they're paying rent and they are close to poverty, we have pension credit. You can still qualify for housing benefit if you're on the state pension. It doesn't cover your housing arrangements. We do have welfare that's in place to help those people out, and we should. It is good that we have those things.
One comment that Paul made just during this segment with Hannah, a £1,500 solar system, 4 panels and a control unit halves energy bills. The best £1,500 people can spend. Labour should be giving these away if they want to win in 2029, and jobs created installing them.
It was so dishonest from Rachel Reeves, though, because she said, so first of all, it saves £150 per year. Once again, this is kind of like, the way I see that policy is the way how people moan about taxes, and then you have politicians saying, I want to cut taxes so you can keep more of your own money. Well, where's most of the cost coming from? It's not coming from taxes. It's when you pay your mortgage and rent and bills. That's what you should address. And I think when you say, oh, I'm going to cut £150 a year on bills due to this ECO thing, really, it would make no difference if bills went up by £150 elsewhere. You need to tackle the actual pricing. I think actually Lloyd Russell Moyle said said on Politics Joe, really good policy. So I support doing a national crusade of implementing insulation and heat pumps for every household. No one pays, no means testing. It's paid through taxation, and it's literally someone comes around your house and fits it for you for every single house. It's something that's necessary as well. So the ECO was just a conservative little fix anyway. It wasn't particularly it wasn't a strong policy. It was a sticking plaster policy, to borrow the phrase. I think Lloyd is right. There should be a national crusade to go to every single house in the country and free of charge, insulate people's homes.
But this is what pisses me off when I hear the likes of Reform UK and Richard Tice and others, talking about net stupid zero and, taking a war on net zero. Net zero is not just solely about, the climate crisis. It's also about things like exactly that policy that he's suggested there, insulating people's homes, which brings down fucking energy bills. If your home is keeping in the heat, you don't have to have your heating on for as long. Your energy bills are lower because you're not using as much energy.
But
so many of these net zero policies actually make people better off.
And also, if you reduce overall residential demand for energy, the supply of energy will be the same. You're reducing the demand. The overall cost comes down for everybody else as well. Every business that relies on energy, which is basically every business, which is why we had such an inflationary crisis when energy prices went up. And it makes us uncompetitive because energy bills are so high. We'll see their bills drop because they're not competing with residential houses, which are using way less energy because of insulation and have their own energy supply because of solar panels. It's a win-win-win, as Ellie Chowns put it.
But reform are not on the side of, because a lot of times politics is framed as like the worker versus the business. Reform are not on the side of business. Reform are on the side of the oligarchs because, one, they absolutely despise working from home. Businesses really like people working from home because commercial landlordism, they can save rent on that. So that's a policy in which it's better for the worker because you get more flexible working. People like to work from home part-time, should we say. But also businesses don't have to pay so much rent when it comes to commercial landlordism. Nigel Farage fucking hates that. He wants you to stay in the office. When it comes to energy, as Helena pointed out there, the reason why Richard Tice defends this is because, oh wait, reform are backed by the oil companies. If you're a small business, you love green energy. Everyone loves green energy. It's good for the planet. It's good for people. It's good for businesses. Long term, energy will be pretty much zero because we have an abundance of solar. We have an abundance of wind. It will become literally zero apart from some administration costs, right? That is literally better for everyone. It's one of those cases where it's not people versus business. It's literally people and business benefiting together. The only people who don't like it are the oil oligarchs who want to protect their profits. Richard Tice, Nigel Farage reform are literal bitches for the oligarchs and capital. It's all they fucking are. They despise small and medium-sized businesses. They
really
fuck
do.
themselves.
And to go back on the work from home one specifically, right? Like Richard Tice is a property magnate. That is how he made his money. It's in property.
Yeah.
He stands to lose if the demand for commercial property rentals goes down. It's the same with Alan Sugar railing against lack of productivity from work from home. Bullshit. All the studies show that he's wrong. Turns out most of Alan Sugar's money is not in computing anymore. It's in commercial property. His biggest arm of his business is Amsprop, i.e. Amstrad Properties, his massive commercial real estate company. These people are parasites. They are parasites on the economy. Adam Smith knew it. Karl Marx knew it. Chairman Mao knew it. Henry George knew it. And all you fuckers at home know it as well.
There's also the point of where they're finding some of this money from. I saw Caroline Lucas had tweeted earlier saying, I've got the tweet here, she said, raiding the Warm Homes plan to find money for a one-off cut to energy bills is utterly perverse when the plan exists precisely to insulate homes and thus keep bills lower in perpetuity. All made worse by scrapping the eco scheme that also funded energy efficiency. And I mean, she's right, because when they're taking money from the Warm Homes plan, but that's local governments that's going to pay for that. That's local councils that's going to be funding that. That's where that's going to come from because it's money out of their pocket.
I mean, it had as Hannah said earlier, it had its problems because people were not fitting them properly, or it was low quality, and in some cases just had better regulation. But also, like long term, we need to transform our energy systems. It is so important. We just have to do that. And the way Reform are lying about the cost of net zero, saying it's going to cost £1 trillion to transform to green energy, but they're including a figure because they threw out this figure. They're including the figure of what it would cost if we waited like 10, 20 years. The cost to transform our energy system is only ever going to go up. It's never going to go down. It's now or never. We pay the money now, we invest in the future, and then we get abundant clean energy. Who is against abundant energy? The only people who are against abundant energy who want to create manufactured scarcity. Once again, it's the fucking oligarchs.
It's because they mean fossil fuel as a commodity is what they're selling you. It's not the energy, it's the use of the commodity, and the commodity with a scarce resource means you want to be able to drive demand for it. Whereas if you have clean energy, it's just being generated. There's no commodity going in to supply it.
And it's where I cannot believe I really agree with Reem Ibrahim here. Reem Ibrahim called out Richard Tice because, ironically, when it comes to clean energy, it wants to be the market favors clean energy. The problem with we don't want to leave climate change down to the free market because it's too slow. We want to speed it up, but the free market rewards clean energy. It's happening that way, just how the market is rewarding people working from home. These are inevitable things, and Reform's policy is to add a tax onto clean energy. So they're trying to manufacture higher prices for clean energy. And then they turn around and say, hey, look, we care about cheap energy. Stick to oil because it's cheaper. No, because you're creating a manufactured increased costs in clean energy because you want to tax clean energy. They're literally manipulating the market. So-called capitalists, and even Reem Ibrahim, who I disagree with on everything, called out Richard Tice and said, this is quite literally anti-free market. It was brilliant.
Yeah, it is worth pointing out though, before people get too freaked out by Curtis agreeing with Reem Ibrahim doesn't realise that the reason why the markets are moving towards clean energy is because of China, and that's because they have a massive industrial policy and they're trying to tweak the market for clean energy ends. You know, just another Xi Jinping do nothing win moment.
Do nothing in win. Yeah.
For those asking, I have shared the Discord link in the comments for anyone that wants to join our Discord channel.
Do it.
Just before we wrap up, then, what are your, just for the two of you, what are your final thoughts then? If you had to sort of summarise today's budget, what would you say? Start with yourself, Curtis.
I think it was overall a win for the left in the way of scrapping the 2-child benefit cap. I liked the taxes on properties. Disappointed that capital gains wasn't equalised with income taxes. What it showed, though, was that if the Greens were still polling at 6%, a lot of policies wouldn't be in there. They're polling at 17%. They were scared. It was, in some ways, progressive. The problem is, in a neoliberal framework, it was a fairly okay-ish, goodish budget. The problem is, though, we need to break the shackle of neoliberalism, because all these rules, all these fiscal plans and whatever Rachel Reeves says, it's all nonsense. We can be so much more radical, and there's nothing stopping us. Again, obviously, people, resources, and currency, right? Apart from that, we can do these things. So it's kind of crazy that we're still not broadening our horizons, not based on actual limits of the economy, but because someone said there's a limit and we're following it. So it's a very neoliberal budget. It's not transformational, but were we expecting transformation from Rachel Reeves? No, but there was definitely a step in the right direction within the very fine framework of neoliberalism, and I think that's a win for largely, I would say, the Green Party. Zach Palancy comes out a pretty good winner from this.
Helena?
It's a real nothing burger, I think, how I would view this budget. We were all expecting something that was going to be kind of really kind of game setting or trend setting, I guess, because of all the run up to the budget. There was so much speculation, and it turned out to be some tax rises and a change in welfare spending. It really didn't change the game at all. But what it has done is it's quietened some backbenchers who were probably planning a coup that will have to wait now until the May elections, where they obviously will get trounced at the locals and the elections in the Senate and Holyrood. So that it staved off the leadership coup for another few months. And it has placated some people who might have moved away from Labour because of the 2-child cap on universal credit. But in terms of their own goals of kind of economic growth, of growing the economy, there was no standout policy that was going to create this huge wave of growth. Nothing, no plan for huge R&D investment. The industrial strategy broadly remains the same. It was a tinkering around the edges budget for political reasons rather than for economic reasons.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant, thank you very much. And thanks to Cymru that's just gifted 5 Turn Left memberships as well, just as we're heading off. Brilliant. Well, I'll step down and leave you both to say goodbye. But thanks to everyone as always, and thank you for your comments. And yeah, don't forget as well, you can join us at 8 o'clock on Friday after you've watched Helena over on Bold Politics at 7 o'clock. You can join us at 8, where we'll be streaming live from Liverpool. Yeah, Zara Sultana's pre-conference, pre-Your Party conference rally, which is apparently happening simultaneously to one that's been hosted by Jeremy Corbyn at the other side of town. Although I've not seen anything about that since they announced it, actually.
I've not seen any advertising, no.
So maybe it's not happening, but we'll find out.
I mean, we got asked, why aren't you covering the other one? Was like, well, we can't split ourselves in two.
Yeah, but we will be at the Your Party conference all over the weekend as well. We're going to be there Saturday and Sunday, interviewing, talking to people, and finding out what's really going on behind the scenes, which will be an interesting and insightful weekend, hopefully, as well. So yeah, stay tuned for more from us from that. But I will disappear, and thanks for having me up.
Thank you so much, Callum. Fantastic comment section. Really, really enjoyed that. But of course, that is all we have time for. Thank you to our viewers who tuned in. And of course, thank you, Helena, for joining me tonight. I really enjoyed this one. I think when we get to talk about economics, a little bit of political theory, it's always my favourite.
It was absolutely banger episode. Great one.
Banger
absolutely
episode.
A pleasure to be here on the most exciting day of the year for us nerds.
Exactly. Now, remember to like the stream, and if you're not a subscriber, then please hit that button. If you want us to grow, then you can head over to turnleftmedia.co.uk/support. There is a link to our Patreon where you can support us monthly, or follow the other link to give us a one-time contribution. Alternatively, you could become a YouTube member for just 99p. Remember to watch Helena on Bold Politics this Friday at 7 p.m. Of course, Callum reminded you of our show afterwards. If you want to support Helena, her is @NoJusticeMTG. Give her money, give her subscribers, give her a follow, because the left is only better when we grow, and of course when Helena grows. But thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.